Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rant Radio Live. And today we are pre-recording this broadcast as a result of a lack of Wi-Fi, but we hope you guys enjoy this program. This week's segment is going to be going after the LAPD, and I will also be touching on the latest events surrounding the Dorner case. But first, I want to take a moment to acknowledge somebody who we recently lost in the activist community, and his name is Aaron Swartz. I mentioned him on the program last week when I was talking about Anonymous, and today I got a very awesome phone call from a fellow Anon who goes by the name Anon Binary on Twitter. And what they were able to tell me is that the sympathy that goes out to Aaron, especially today, which marks the 1-month anniversary of his suicide, it was important that Anonymous release a statement in his name and in his honor, and to pay tribute to who he was, despite who he was convicted to be and pre-sentenced to be. So when I was talking with Binary, I learned a lot about this individual. I learned that very much like Aaron at the age of 14, they also got introduced into the internet world and quickly became a wizard and mastering this technology that we all take for granted and that most of us don't even understand very well. These individuals took their time to really conquer the internet and became very attached to it, so much so that in the dark, under the cloak of no identity really, they were able to bring down SOPA and PIPA. And these are the unsung heroes of the internet that have been keeping freedom of information actually free. So what I want to read first is an excerpt from the piece that Binary contributed to. Binary has been working very hard in the support for Aaron Swartz and getting the word out there. So it was important to Binary that I read from this statement as well. So I won't read the whole thing. It is very lengthy. You can find it if you go to Anon Binary. It is there. Or more information, of course, is available on Anon News and several different outlets. So I'm going to jump right in and read what the statement was today, commemorating the 1-month anniversary of Aaron Swartz's tragic suicide. Anonymous presents Aaron Swartz Day. I get tongue-tied for some reason. So what is Aaron Swartz Day? It is a day of remembrance. Is it a day of awareness? We take this day in the name and memory of Aaron Swartz. Aaron was a brilliant young mind who co-founded RSS 1.0, and at the age of 14, that began his career in activism. And Aaron wasn't satisfied with such an amazing accomplishment at such a young age, they say. He realized he had a gift and wanted to share that gift with the world. Aaron went on to contribute to the creation of the Creative Commons licensing process. He continued his career by creating Reddit, which is a forum to share information that is written and it can be read by others. So similar to the social media outlets that have come afterwards. These guys were the pioneers of these things, along with other free sites known as openlibrary.org. So he was the creator of these two things. They go on to say that, of course, quote, Aaron is best known for his unauthorized work with JSTOR. Aaron sought to liberate millions of JSTOR documents from their vaults to the archives of the internet as a product of open access. Aaron was a staunch believer in open access and had faith that through open access, people of the world could reach an unprecedented state of being. In other words, Aaron was seeking a new age of enlightenment through open access, through the internet. That is what I want to pause there and just explain that to you guys, because I found this so interesting, and I told Binary myself that I was really moved by this use of perspective to identify what Aaron was really about. He was trying to liberate us. Aaron was trying to use the internet as a democratic forum where all information could be available, and that way we, the citizens, could make informed decisions and have a venue as well to be heard. And so there were a lot of action that was able to be taken through the internet because of its free realm, and enabled a lot of people to make big statements, as Aaron did. And so in Seeking the Age of Enlightenment, it says, simply put, Aaron wanted, as we all do, freedom of information. And that's what it was really about. Binary and I talked a little bit briefly in his busy schedule, in the busy schedule that he has, that it's really hard for activists to continue the work that they do because of how grueling it is. And every day they wake up and they live and breathe what they're doing. They live and breathe the internet and the fight and the information that's coming and the news that's coming. So what it goes on to say here is that we choose this day to remember Aaron through social media because it represents the 1-month mark of Aaron's death. He committed suicide because of the impossible amounts of pressure put on him by a justice system. And justice system is in quotes, because we know that's not what we have. And activists that choose the internet as a realm to express themselves and to force out information that is being concealed, they are targeted and they are pressured by the federal charges that come upon them if they are revealed. It is a dangerous and stressful atmosphere to be in day after day. And Aaron suffered quite a lot of it because of how severe his charges were. And there are plenty of Anons who remain anonymous who realize the reality of what Aaron was fighting for and the consequences that come with it. So what they seek is to persecute rather than prosecute. And what Binary told me was that it's important for us to distinguish between the two. It's important for us to see that persecution is not justice, and that persecution does not mean there is an actual crime, and that people are prosecuted based on who they are and what they do, rather than looking at the actual severity, if any, of the actual charge that they are being convicted of. And something as simple as sharing a URL is the kind of stuff I'm talking about that gets completely blown out of proportion, and people go away for years for this. And with this statement that's been made through Anonymous, through Anon Binary specifically, I also want to reread the quote from Taryn herself, and she was Aaron's partner before his death. So I want to read it in its entirety because last week I did flub a little bit of the end of the quote. So it's important that I get this right in respect to her and respect to Aaron, so that her words are heard the way she intended. So once again, this is a quote on Aaron Schwartz Day from Taryn, Aaron's partner. I believe Aaron's death was caused by exhaustion, by fear, and by uncertainty. I believe Aaron's death was caused by a persecution and a prosecution that had already wound on for 2 years and had already drained all of his financial resources. I believe that Aaron's death was caused by a criminal justice system that prioritizes power over mercy, vengeance over justice, a system that punishes innocent people for trying to prove their innocence, which is supposed to be covered under the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment. It punishes innocent people for trying to prove their innocence instead of accepting plea deals that mark them as criminals in perpetuity, a system where incentives and power structures align for prosecutors to destroy the life of an innovator, like Aaron, in the pursuit of their own ambitions. If on January 10th, Steve Heyman and Carmen Ortiz at the Massachusetts U.S. Attorney's Office had called Aaron's lawyer and said they'd realized their mistake and that they were dropping all charges, or even for that matter, that they were ready to offer a reasonable plea, that wouldn't have marked Aaron as a felon for the rest of his life. Would Aaron have killed himself on January 11th? The answer is unquestionably no, and that's what it's about. It's about the persecution of the wrong people and the severe justice system that is against those who fight real crime and those who are against having the truth concealed and having what really happens go unnoticed and unreported. That's what it is about for us as activists, and that's why I do this show, and that's why I think it's important in seeing all these recent events and seeing the persecution of our brothers and sisters, seeing comrades suffer and others have to live under the cloak of invisibility just to be heard. I want to talk about the LAPD because they have been getting quite a lot of heat lately, and this comes as no surprise to me because after learning what I did this week about the history of the LAPD, this is just another day in the life of a corrupt police department. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I've got a lot to share, and I'm really excited because I learned so much from everything that I wrote down. And I hope that you guys enjoy it and you learn a lot from it. And maybe then all of us together, you guys watching and us doing the research and reporting can better make an understanding and assessment of the Chris Dorner case and the huge manhunt that has been underway by the LAPD for days. So we are going to be talking about Chris Dorner a little bit, and I will have some more quotes from him, because I'd rather you hear it in his words, not just mine. So to start off, I have a little intro, and maybe it'll help you guys understand where we're at, especially not just in the LAPD, but in the police system in the U.S. as a whole, because they all work very closely together. The LAPD ranks third in the country for their power and their capabilities. They are one of the largest police forces. They come third only to NYPD's force, which of course is the largest, seventh largest army in the world, and then Chicago, which also has quite a beefy existence in the Windy City. So there has been quite an escalation of events since we rang in the new year. And it is looking to be the year, in my words, of the trigger-happy cowboy cops and their estranged witnesses breaking their silence in extreme ways. The online world has been buzzing about this case and has been really starting to take another look at the LAPD. Of course, we know that the LAPD has been something you don't really always want to reckon with because of their crackdown on Occupy LA, Occupy Oakland, and Occupy San Francisco. And that was really where I first got a taste of what the LAPD is like. And seeing it in Chicago and New York, they're all just cuts from the same cloth. So the latest media sensation, of course, the media has sank their teeth into the LAPD manhunt of Chris Dorner. And one of the things that has been argued a lot online was that Chris Dorner is not actually the madman. It is the crazy, out-of-control policies of the LAPD that helped create somebody who was willing to resort to these sorts of means and take, as I said in my blog, the last tool out of their box to make their point and possibly clear their name. So not only is there a $1 million bounty on Chris Dorner's head right now, but there are a fleet of drones that are ranging from the Predator drones, which carry missile capabilities, to the basic surveillance drones, and some that pick up just heat sensory or, movement, surveillance, binocular scoping. It's all being used to track down this one man, and this is unprecedented in our country's history. Never before has a drone been used to track down an American civilian. So this is really showing us what the LAPD has in their arsenal and what they are capable of and what their means are if pushed, or perhaps if there are just too many dirty secrets that they need to keep under wraps, that they are willing to expose every single means to wipe us all out of their arsenal and use it on one man. And unfortunately, it is backfiring on the LAPD because a lot of people are saying that this is just further proving a point that the LAPD is frantic and they're scared and they don't want Chris to tell the truth because they already thought that firing him was enough. But that's what we're going to get to. So they're frantic. They're trying to catch this individual. And I think that they must be the most inept and colorblind cops that I've ever seen. Because if you guys have been watching the news, you'll know that already the LAPD has shot at 3 individuals who were white, ranging from 2 older women, 1 woman that was about 43 with her mother who was 71. They were riding around in a truck delivering newspapers one morning when suddenly the LAPD pulled up on them and opened fire with no warning. Then there was the gentleman who was going for a little bit of surfing before his day at work. He was pulled over, questioned and interrogated, and then let go, only to have the LAPD ram their vehicle into him and open fire. Once again, without warning. Somebody is told they are free to go. The last thing you expect is to get into a car accident and then shot at. And so this is what's happening. The LAPD has gone completely out of control, but this is nothing new. And that's what Dorner points out, that this is actually a long history of violence, racism, oppression, and bad tactics and bad behavior, not only going unpunished, but going unwitnessed, unreported, and rewarded. and there are cliques that are dedicated to this. There are gloating ceremonies that are dedicated to this, and matching tattoos. All of this going on within the LAPD, unchecked and unsupervised and given no attention. And you'll see when I start talking about the history where this really leads us and how this all came about. How we went from something that was supposed to serve and protect into something that has just further oppressed the few, the minorities, the people who dare to speak out, and been put in place not so much for the protection of the citizens, but to protect the banks, the corporations, the rich elite, and their agendas on us and our lives. And we all know this. But I feel like it's always important that we keep hashing out these themes, that the themes that we've been fighting for the last year and a half repeat themselves over and over again, and we can plug all of the things that we've been talking about just into the LAPD scandals alone. So they can't locate this guy. That's the funniest thing to me. With all of their weapons, all of their technology, they can't find a man who's 6'4", 270 pounds, and he's a black man. So far, 3 of the people they have shot at that weren't him weren't even the same race. And I know that this is something that the LAPD shouldn't be unaccustomed to. They're a bunch of racist bastards, and that's the way it is. So to suddenly not take a shot at every black man, they must really be afraid of something getting out or drawing any further controversy and heat on themselves. So they can't find him. But the interesting thing is Chris Dorner has really turned the tables on the LAPD. And what he's done is he's disappeared, remaining at large. He's pledged to continue his agenda. And he's revealed information and is willing to reveal more names, not just the ones that he has already deemed high-value targets. These are people in specific that he has a personal vendetta with and feels that they are a detriment to society and honestly might deserve to just get wiped off the mat. No one is accusing him of anything. I will get into what he's being accused of later. But what is to be said right now is that we have to understand how he got to this point. And we have to attempt to understand Chris Dorner. How do we get to this point? In my learning of these events, I'm constantly asking myself why. What is happening that is anything new? Is this anything new, or is this just a perpetuation of a toxic police department that is insanely corrupt? I shouldn't think it should come a surprise to any of us that someone such as Chris Dorner, who served in the LAPD and witnessed this brutality, witnessed the corruption, and was told to say nothing. How can someone stand for this? At some point, for these people, their conscience starts kicking in, and they can no longer ignore it. So the LAPD's roots go back with this corruption for over a century. And the LAPD really got its start when the gold rush started to happen. And this is in the 1850s. So California during the gold rush experienced a huge boom in settlements. Everybody basically came to California to get rich quick. In the beginning, gold was on the ground and you could just pick it up. And soon people were panning the streams and digging the mountains to find their little piece of financial happiness. But unfortunately that came with a price, because at the time land ownership and property zone definitions were very obscure and unclear. So when bandits started coming into town, the violence and murder rates in California and in LA started to skyrocket. So something needed to be done about this, and that was the beginning creation of the police force in LA. It started out as the LA Rangers, and there were several different groups, including the LA Guards and the LA City Guards. And what they tried to do was crack down on a lot of the out-of-control crime that was happening as a result of people grabbing people's land, people stealing each other's belongings, and all of the things that come along with a sudden spike in greed. And that's really where it came out of. The cops were originally brought in to try to corral the insane amount of greed and the violence that came with it during the gold rush. So in the 1850s, the gold rush brings in migrations from tons of areas of the country and even the world of people looking to strike gold. And this is when the property ownership and the establishment of land starts. And at this time, LA does have one of the highest murder rates in the country. Shit's really bad in LA at this point. At this point, people were carrying their own weapons. They were using lynching as a matter to serve out justice because courts at the time were far and few between. So people had to take it upon themselves to punish lawbreakers, and that was usually done by lynching. In 1869, the police force is starting to get a little bit more organized. They formed the first Board of Police Commissioners. And from 1876 to 1889, they have 15 different police chiefs serve. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a big trend with the early police forces. There was a huge turnover in staff. The police chiefs were dropping like flies and getting replaced in a heartbeat. And it wasn't really until 1889 when John Glass was made police chief. He served 11 years, so he lasted a little bit longer than the other guys. But otherwise, a really high turnover for a position that us in New York, for instance, have seen Ray Kelly reign forever. We've seen Mayor Bloomberg bide his terms. So that starts happening later. But right now, a lot of people are switching in and out. There are some attempts at reform and really trying to create more of a structure. But it isn't until John Glass comes along where he ups the force to 70 officers, and that's about one for every 1,500 people at the time. And now we're coming into the 1900s. In 1903, the force is then over doubled to 200, and that's the start of the civil service. And in 1916, training is finally introduced. These guys have been patrolling the cities and trying to fight crime, and they have no official training. So finally, about, 20, 30, 50, 60 years later, they decide to get their act together and start actually training some kind of consistency among their ranks. So once again, between 1900 and 1923, we see another turnover of 16 different chiefs. And in 1910, the first female officer was sworn. So a little rah-rah there, some diversity, but for the most it was male-oriented at the beginning. And then World War II hits. And when World War II hits, that's when the force starts getting involved in federal offenses and federal dealings because of the war and wanting to protect the borders. So LA organizes the Special Home Guard, and this was really kind of like the precursor to DHS. These squads were made to protect the city from invaders and any potential terrorist-like threats that might come out of that. And then a lot of post-war corruption starts happening. After the war is winding down, they have really infiltrated the police department in LA, and it becomes a joint collaboration between them and the feds. The turnover rate of the chiefs continues. Some chiefs are still trying to stab at reform, but it's really not getting anywhere. So already, even in the early 1920s, there is this solidification of this is the way it is, and this is the way it goes. The corruption filters down from the politics and the government and seeps into the commanding officers and trickles down into their boys on patrol. And none of this is really regulated, none of this is really checked, none of this is really held accountable for itself. And that's one of the problems. So in 1926, James Davis is hired as police chief. And he really tries to turn a few things around. He starts off by firing about 1/5 of the force for bad conduct. He institutes a firearms training, which they still didn't have at this point. So possibly using guns without knowing how to use guns. I don't think that has changed much today, but he was trying. He also formed the dragnet system. And what the dragnet system is a use of coordinated measures to apprehend criminals. So it was their way of really using a whole bunch of different resources in order to nab a guy. And that's where you start seeing the compartmentalizing of the police department, where there's different facets of it that do different things. They handle different parts of society's ills. For instance, the mentally ill have a whole squad dedicated to mentally ill patients and coordinating with clinicians to direct people to either jail or hospitals. And so in his second term, because James Davis served 2 terms, he did that in the first one. In the second term, he forms the Red Squad to attack communists, because that was going on at the time. So that was a huge issue, was this threat of communism. And if you think about it today, the threat of communism then is no different than the threat of terrorism today. We use the same tactics we used back then to try to suppress any communist offices, groups, or speak-outs. Any information that was being brought out by communist parties was attacked by the LA police force at the time. And then we got a reformist mayor. So in 1938, we get a reformist mayor named Fletcher Brown, and he forces dozens of city commissioners to be fired, as well as firing 45 of the LAPD. And he appoints the first black woman to the commission, and that sounds great, but there were still signs of major corruption and resignations soon to follow. So there were some attempts, but honestly, it's like one man going up against an entire slew of goons and mobsters and downright dirty criminals that are running the mayor's office, that are running the police department, and really any attempt to change that runaway train from its trajectory was quickly subdued by the ridiculous corruption that follows. So in 1939, Arthur Human, he was one other chief that had to resign because he refused to use the LAPD to break strikers of the North American Aviation Plan. So here we're seeing what is the LAPD's role in peaceful protest. And that is one of the first times that these strikers that are trying to be heard and are fighting for better conditions or better pay or better retirement packages, they are being assaulted by the LAPD. And this police chief refused to do it for this strike. He refused to use them, and he had to resign as a result. And that's just a perfect example of what we see today. We see a lot of union busting done simply by the NYPD or LAPD showing up and simply breaking it and not letting it to happen. And this is an assault on our First Amendment rights. So there are signs that there were police chiefs that saw this and saw the role that LAPD was starting to serve in the community, which was not really to promote the rights of citizens and to serve and protect those rights, but rather to prevent any forms of peaceful assembly from happening because somehow it may be an endangerment to their own safety or the safety of the community. All this shit getting skewed. Then World War II happens. World War II leaves LAPD heavily depleted as they try to meet the demands of the armed forces. Recruits during this time only received half of their training. So not only are they down in numbers, they're down in trained officers that can actually really deal with the situations that they're confronted with on a daily basis. And in 1943, we have the Zoot Suit riots. And these riots broke out at the time between white sailors and Marines who were stationed there during World War II, and the Latino, African American, and Filipino youths that lived in the area where these sailors were stationed. So the riots were sparked after a mysterious death of a Latino youth by the name of Jose Gallardo, and he was found unconscious near a local watering hole which was popular in the Latino community, known as the Sleepy Lagoon. As a result of his body being found, he later did die, but 17 Mexican-American youths were incarcerated. They were arrested as suspects. They were held in prison without bail on murder charges despite having any sufficient evidence to prove they may be guilty. And even though their convictions were later reversed in 1944, the murder of Jose is still a mystery. So these riots sparked because these individuals were held without any due process. They were wrongfully imprisoned on insufficient evidence. And it was demanded that they be set free. But they had to be jailed and then go through the trial process to finally have their convictions reversed. So this caused major unrest in a community that was already suffering blatant racism and blatant discrimination, not just from the LAPD, but from the political community at large. So this also starts a slew of scandals. So it's not just these riotings that are sprinkled throughout LAPD history. It's also these major scandals. And one of the big ones was in 1947 called the Black Dahlia. And this is a really bad case. It was a gruesome murder of Elizabeth Short. Some thought that she was a prostitute. She was trying to become an actress. And her gruesome death, because her body was so mutilated when they found her, it became a huge media spectacle. And this actually really hampered on the investigation process for the LAPD. the media starts really getting their nose into all these kinds of issues, and not always in a good way. Instead of reporting the facts and reporting what the investigation was actually doing, they turned it into a huge spectacle where Elizabeth Short was called names, and she became a celebrity overnight. And when somebody hasn't been charged with someone's murder, and the case suddenly becomes a celebrity case, it's very hard to learn the truth, because already the public opinion is so skewed and so biased that finding even a jury that could rightfully and objectively judge a case is very, very difficult. So this was really bad for the LAPD. You know, they along with hundreds of others, assisted in trying to rule out dozens of suspects, some of who came forward. And to this day, despite the investigation, it's just another mystery in the LAPD archives. And then there was the Brenda Allen scandal the following year. Brenda Allen was actually an LA madam, and she was arrested, and that led to a little bit of reform in the department. They used wiretaps to convict her for her prostitution ring, and she had a relationship with Sergeant Elmer Jackson, who was part of the LAPD's Vice Squad. And after somebody tried to rob them, Jackson shot at the robber, and that was when their relationship got revealed to the media as well as the rest of the department. So basically, while she was on trial, she outed all of the dirty little secrets that the LAPD had kept and the things that she had learned specifically from this sergeant. So once again, the police force there was completely shamed, and the police chief at the time, Clemens Horrell, had to resign. Again, the trend of scandals, cover-ups, and resignations to save face. And basically, the department was once again revealed as being utterly corrupt and had a fancy for prostitutes. Lovely. In 1950, Chief William Parker takes over, and he reigns over LAPD for 16 years. He advocated for police professionalism, and he was the one that actually coined the phrase "serve and protect," which went into effect in 1955. But that didn't come without a scandal. In the same year, the Bloody Christmas scandal, which was a severe beating of 7 men by the LAPD. 5 of them were Latino, 2 were white, and they were left with broken bones and ruptured organs. As a result, the only investigation that came out of this severe beating was from the heavy outcry from the Mexican-American community. They lobbied heavily for this to be investigated, for this case to be blown open, and it was only when the community was outraged and responded that the LAPD even bothered to look into such an assault and such excessive police brutality. So Parker, the chief, he decides to conduct an internal investigation. 8 are indicted, and 54 are transferred, and 39 are suspended. And this is actually featured in LA Confidential. I encourage you guys to check that out and watch it. Parker served until 1966. He died of a heart attack. The motto, "Protect and Serve," was left behind with him. And despite attempts at establishing a more professional force, the riots and the corruption and the scandals continued. So in 1965, the Watts riots, also known as the Watts Rebellion, happens. It's a 6-day riot in the Watts neighborhood, and Watts was predominantly a black community, some Latino at the time, and there were a lot of issues with the fact that these citizens had been dealing with blatant discrimination for years. They were denied affordable housing. They were denied service at certain restaurants. This, again, don't forget, this was the time when things were so segregated, when racism was running rampant. And they rioted. 34 died. Over 1,000 were injured. There were over 3,400 arrests. And $40 million was done in property damage. And the $40 million in property damage was mostly done to white-owned businesses that either denied services to minorities or contributed to the blatant discrimination and refusal to black and Latino residents in the area. So they were also excluded from high-paying jobs, And they were angry about this. So somebody had to fight back against this discrimination and what was really an economic unequal situation, very similar to what we're dealing with in Occupy, that is happening and now affecting everyone. Back then, it was the oppressed minorities that were experiencing economic inequality at the time, and they tried to rise up. So during Parker's term as chief, while all of this is going on, he is pushing for more independence from political pressures. He's pushing for the LAPD to be more isolated as a force from the rest of the government. And I like to say, in the name of progress, they oppressed the unrest. And in the 1960s, the LAPD was considered one of the best police forces to work for. They were so on the brink of discovery with tactics and procedures, and they were so innovative in how they structured their department. And these are techniques that are used at all the police forces across the country. But because of Parker's lack of attention to the severe police brutality occurring in his department, or towards minorities who faced assault, who were governed by fear and intimidation, as chief, he just emphasized the establishing of dominance within the youth. And somehow if we attack them at the young level, then they won't grow up to be gangbangers and other sorts of criminals. And all the while, the minorities are being more oppressed. They're experiencing more and more violence and discrimination from the cops that claim to be there to protect and serve. All the while, LAPD is strengthening their fortress and solidifying their place in the federal government's gang of armies. So when it comes to riots where 31,000 or 35,000 people participate, riots that escalate by the excessive use of force of officers, you know, there was the pulling over of a 21-year-old. His name was Marquette Fry. He was pulled over in the 60s on suspicion of a DWI. And there was a riot that broke out because of this, because they so severely arrested him, along with his mother and a few other members of his family. And a riot gathered as a crowd grew more and more angry at how the police were treating this kid. And to suppress the riots, 4,000 National Guard were called in, 934 LAPD, and 718 from the county sheriff's department, just to end the uprising. Parker openly described the rioters as monkeys in the zoo. And it's funny because I've heard that term used a lot to describe occupiers who take to the streets. But these were people that were fighting back against a racist, oppressive system. They were being protected and had this obsessive, compulsive system just enforcing these rules on them. And not allowing equality to exist. And anytime they tried to voice it, this basically only applied to white people. That's what they learned. That at the time, you didn't have a place for dissent. Even though the Constitution is supposed to cover all Americans, the First Amendment didn't exist for Black and Latinos in LA. So as a result of all this violence that's breaking out, as a result of these riots, there's a 101-page investigative report that comes out. It's known as the McCone Commission report. And it looked into the use of excessive force by the LAPD. It was an attempt to understand not only why the LAPD was allowing such horrendous practices to continue, but what the root causes of the rioting was, and how these two were linked. And so what they found in their report was that again, these cases and these complaints were rarely looked into. Officers ignored their written guidelines for conduct and force. Repeat offenders were often rewarded. And this is like what I was talking about earlier with this little clique that exists in the LAPD. And they are in the process of being fired right now for what they did. They are known as the Jump Out Boys. And they are basically this cowboy clique of officers who get pleasure out of sharing their stories of beating people, shooting at people, getting overtime for beating up gangbangers and catching criminals. But their conduct is absolutely horrendous and atrocious. It's unethical. It goes against everything that the LAPD is supposed to stand for. And the only reason that they were fired is because right now LAPD is struggling through another federal investigation involving a woman they killed that they were trying to put into custody. So as you can see, the LAPD has really got its hands full. You've got this clique of guys that are completely out of control and trigger happy that get off on basically using excessive force and committing excessive police brutality upon people. But then the LAPD won't even deal with it because they're too busy dealing with some other assholes who killed a woman, putting her into custody. It's really sick, and I honestly don't know how any of these guys sleep at night. I really don't. So Alicia Thomas is her name if you want to find out more about the woman who was killed being brought into custody. She was severely beaten by the LAPD and left her dead. And where they beat her is even more disturbing. But to keep to time, I encourage you guys to look up more about Alicia Thomas and the current investigation there. So, this group that gloats on police brutality, they've existed for about a year, as far as we know. The only written report that came out was a year ago. And the commission report that came out about this kind of excessive use of force, didn't really stop the rioting. It only showed what was causing it, and the LAPD didn't really care what the report recommended. They really didn't care that the report was trying to get them to understand that the way they ran the department was completely dysfunctional and not doing anything good for the community and only furthering the sense of resentment against these officers and furthering the fear among these officers to keep their secret and to look over their shoulder and wonder if an investigation will come upon them because they know what they do when they go out on their patrols. And the commission, by the way, was called Violence in the City, an End or a Beginning. And clearly we can see that it didn't end. Basically, when recommendations to LAPD were made, none were acted upon. And 2 days after these riots, Martin Luther King actually spoke about them. So there were a lot of influential people at the time who were seeing what was happening in LA and really seeing the precedent that was being set when people were trying to speak out. And by 1969, new programs aim at community policing. That is the creation of the Neighborhood Watch. So this is their attempt at trying to make neighborhoods more safe, is by getting the community involved to spy on each other and rat each other out. By 1972, the SWAT team is created, and that is still used today. 1970s, the gangs are still a big problem, so there's another aspect of LAPD that comes into play, and this is also still being used today. It was originally known as TRASH, which stands for Total Resources Against Street Hoodlums, but because of the demeaning nature of the acronym, in respect to its members, it was changed to the name CRASH to be a little bit more polite. But it is the same, and basically their job was to try to suppress any gang-related violence, such as was known with the Crips and the Bloods at the time. And what they did was they used this joint task force. This is the beginning of it. This is the beginning of our current justice system of police, probation, parole, schools, and other forms with the acronym DDCP, which stands for Disposition Data Coordination Project. Basically, long story short, it's a pre-sentence gathering information. They collect information on you, they develop a reputation for you, and this is all allowed under California law at the time to be considered by the court. This is a public hanging of somebody's reputation. This eliminates the idea of due process and innocent until proven guilty. This is guilty by association and guilty until proven so, but in the meantime we'll harass you, lock you up, and beat you because we have this little crash system in place, and it says that you are a criminal. And the ACLU filed a suit against this because of how much this was an infringement on our rights and on our right to due process. So the ACLU starts getting involved, and this is a huge trend that happens throughout the 80s, 90s, and current day, where the LAPD is being sued for the way they treat people. And, like the NYPD has seen over the last year, when you push activists too far, they fight back and they will sue and they win. So this is still used today under the same acronym, and it basically is the system we have of patrols and detectives and supervisors who govern designated areas. They have their own districts, and a lot of times they get away with what they do because there are no higher-ups holding them accountable to this standard. And in 1987, Operation Hammer starts. So this leads to the arrest of mostly minorities in large numbers. This was a huge crackdown in what they thought was gang-related violence, but it was actually just exemplifying the blatant racism because they only targeted Black and Latinos. And by 1997, all 18 units of the LAPD have a crash unit within them. So they've completely infiltrated the department. They are doing this everywhere. And the Rampart Division of Crash, in particular, comes under huge fire. And this is a huge, huge scandal. And it's actually in two different parts. So what the Rampart Division of Crash was a very prominent unit, and the internal corruption started getting outed when there was a plea deal testimony revealed from Rafael Perez. He was a 9-year vet of the department, and he received partial immunity in his cocaine theft case. This guy stole 8 kilos of cocaine from the LAPD's property unit. Like, I'm sure you guys remember this case. It's really hilarious. So he steals all this cocaine. As part of his plea deal, so they would go easy on him, he reveals scores of names of officers from the Rampart Division who participated in routine beatings of gang members. He also revealed that they falsified reports, they planted evidence, they covered up unprovoked shootings, and as a result of his plea, 58 officers are investigated. And by May of 2001, 12 were suspended, 7 resigned, and 5 were terminated from the LAPD. Another one was Javier Ovando, and this was the most central figure in the Rampart scandal. This individual had a gun planted on him to make it look like he had opened fire on the LAPD, just so they could claim self-defense. And this is one of the ways that LAPD gets away with what they do, is they take over the crime scene, they plant the evidence, and everybody stays quiet. The problem was, people didn't stay quiet. So, officers Rafael Perez and Nino Durden, they were the ones involved in this framing. Javier ended up having to do 2.5 years in prison because he was framed for this. He had a sentence of 23 years, and when he went in to serve his sentence, he was paralyzed from the gunshots that the LAPD fired upon him. So he got a $15 million settlement, but I don't think any amount of money could have replaced the amount of psychological damage that the LAPD did to this man and what they put him through and the fact that they framed him. And they decided to pin the whole thing on him and take no responsibility for their trigger-happy ways. It's just another example of these cowboys just completely and utterly out of control. So by 2005, the LAPD is scrambling to get more numbers. They do promotional campaigns for recruits. They use these high-action mini-movies, which are posted online. They're posted in movie theaters. I remember seeing versions of this myself with the NYPD. And this is an attempt to get more recruits. So in 2006, because they're really not doing so well financially, the mayor decides that in order to hire 1,000 more officers to the LAPD, he's going to raise the trash collection fees on property owners. So that's where the money came from. Good old homeowners wanting their trash to get taken away. It comes out of their budget in the way of higher fees to hire more officers. And none of this really does any good. In 2008, the first SWAT officer is killed in the line of duty when he responds to a call after a family was shot. And the individual who had shot the family opened fire and killed the SWAT officer. So there's a lot of nutty stuff that has happened. This kind of brings us current day, and I'm sure that in between 2008 and 2013, I could pull up a lot of other scandals and a lot of other issues of police brutality, and I'm sure there were so many that went undocumented at the time. But what Chris Dorner was trying to do was reveal a little bit of that truth. And in 2008, Chris Dorner was also fired from the LAPD. He's 33 years old. He's a former naval lieutenant, and he was honorably discharged from the Mobile and Shore Undersea Warfare Unit. He had been deployed in Bahrain during his service. He was fired for lying on a report about Officer Teresa Evans, and she is now a sergeant. But when he was a rookie, he witnessed her brutally kick a mentally ill man named Chris Geffer, and Chris and his father testified for this to be true, that this officer at the time, while Dorner was still in training, brutally kicked this mentally ill man, and then had the entire thing pinned on Chris Dorner when he later tried to reveal the misconduct himself. They twisted this case, they manipulated it, and now, as a result of Chris Dorner fleeing the area and has been put on this manhunt list, there is now a pending investigation looking into how he actually was fired and what was going on at the time. So, why is Dorner on the run? Well, Dorner was let go of the police force to protect the reputation of the LAPD, and Chris is angry about that. This was once again corruption that was leading to violence. And Chris pointed out how the LAPD has evolved. And now that you've seen the history, I want to read you from his own words how he feels about the evolution of the LAPD. The LAPD has not changed since the Rampart scandal and the Rodney King days. The consent decree should never have been lifted. The only thing that has evolved from the consent decree is those officers involved in the Rampart and Rodney King incidents have since been promoted to supervisor, commander, command staff, and executive positions. What he points out is that the lifting and oversight of agreements with the federal government has led to the continued corruption and violence within the department. Because it goes unchecked, there's no opportunity for us to hold these officers accountable and to have possible resignations, firings, transfers, or times of leave. There is no opportunity to really show that we have a standard in this country and that we are not going to allow officers to abuse it and ignore it and gloat when they so blatantly violated it. And so currently, Chris Dorner is being accused not just of lying on his police report from his 2008 firing, but of killing Monica Kwan, who is the daughter of a former police captain who represented him in his disciplinary proceedings when he lost his job. So here is somebody who's been murdered. She's the daughter of the man that helped fire him. He's also being accused of killing her fiancé, Keith Lawrence, as well as another LAPD officer. So that's why the hunt is out. He's being accused not only of killing now 1, 2, 3 people, but he is on the run because of what he knows and because of the capabilities that he has. And because they know that a man that has served in the military and in the police department and is angry is not something to fuck with. And that's what he's preparing to do. He has told us in his agenda that he has high-value targets. He has told us that he intends to reveal information and to bring justice and to clear his name. I know he has an intention of staying alive long enough to see this out, but now that there is such a hunt and such a broad-scale attempt to bring him down by whatever means necessary, only time will tell whether or not we will see that happen. Basically, the media dubs him as the madman, as a madman's rant and a declaration of war. So here we go, the media is sinking their teeth into this. The only parts of his manifesto that they bothered to mention is where he references a kudo to Charlie Sheen, rather than bringing up any of the corruption that he draws attention to. And most of the media might have only received the edited version, courtesy of the LAPD's restrictions of it. Luckily, we were able to get a glimpse into the real document, courtesy of a well-placed hack. So we know how he really feels and why he is doing what he's doing. So in saying that, I'd like to let his words speak for himself once again. And I'm going to read you a piece from his manifesto. This is unedited, and this is as it was written, as we've received it. So it begins, and I quote, I am not an aspiring rapper. I am not a gang member. I am not a dope dealer. I don't have multiple babies' mamas. I am an American by choice. I am a son. I am a brother. I am a military service member. I am a man who has lost complete faith in the system, when the system betrayed, slandered, and libeled me. I lived a good life, and though not a religious man, I always stuck to my own personal code of ethics, ethos, and always stuck to my shoreline and my true north. I didn't need U.S. Navy to instill honor, courage, and commitment in me, but I thank them for reinforcing it. It's in my DNA. Luckily, I don't have to live every day like most of you, concerned if the misconduct you are a part of is going to be discovered. Looking over your shoulder, scurrying at every call from internal affairs or the captain's office, wondering, is that the day the PSB comes after you for the suspects you struck months ago? Or that $500 you pocketed from that narcotics dealer? Or when the other guys on your watch beat a transient nearly to death and you never reported the UOF to the supervisor? No, I don't have that concern. I stood up for what was right, but unfortunately have dealt with the repercussions of doing the right thing, and now losing my name and everything I ever stood for. People who live in glass houses should not throw stones. How ironic that you utilize a fixed glass structure as your command headquarters. You use a luminous building to symbolize that you are transparent, have nothing to hide or suppress, when in essence, concealing, omitting, and obscuring is your forte. So that's what it's about. And that's why I wanted to cover the history of the LAPD. Because what is happening is nothing new. This happened during the Rampart scandal. This happened during the scandal with Rodney King, when Rodney King was brutally beaten after being pulled over in a car chase, and he was just an innocent motorist, and the acquittal of the officers that beat him from any of their charges, it sent shockwaves through LA, and riots ensued. This was one individual who has refused to stay silent since his early days when he experienced police brutality himself. And Chris Dorner falls a lot in their footsteps, where I'm sure he's experienced blatant racism and discrimination and sat by silently, trying to wrap his head around on why his comrades insisted on using police brutality and then rewarding themselves with it, and why the standard and the code of conduct that he held within himself, not by a religion or that was forced upon him, and he couldn't see that in his comrades. It's the same way I feel when I feel like, why is it that I believe in doing what's right, and I believe in telling the truth and letting my conscience be my guide, but that others succumb to their own selfish needs. They succumb to greed, and they succumb to horrible acts, and then have the fear to try to cover them up instead of fessing up to their deeds. And where we're at right now is that this manhunt for Chris Dorner continues to swirl and swarm and change, and Jack and I have had quite a hard time keeping up with it. It's been so much information, and we will give you guys the latest updates via our Twitter on everything that's happening. The latest info that we've had is actually 3 people that were injured so far in the pursuit of Chris Dorner. David Perdue, who was a white man on his way to surfing. He was stopped, questioned, then let go, and seconds later he was shot at. And again, the same with these 2 women. So if you guys want to hear more about that, definitely look up on Uranon News, look up things that we're retweeting, definitely on Facebook, and definitely keep up on this, because this is historic. This is really, really historic. So again, for anybody who's not sure about the Twitter, it's JAK_NLAUREN, and that you can find on Twitter. You can also always hashtag JNL, give us some hashtag love, and keep up with this. What happened to Aaron Swartz is awful, and what Chris Dorner is potentially facing is also awful. I can't imagine what it must feel like to know that you have been betrayed, and you sought truth and sought confidence in your comrades, and were only used to further their reputation in a completely skewed way. And beyond that, to also know that you are now being hunted not just by men, but by machines. And how scary that is. This is unprecedented, and if there's anything I want you guys to take away from this segment, is that we know the LAPD is corrupt. We know the LAPD is a bunch of bad boys who never got told what was right and what was wrong and what was acceptable. They have a code of conduct that they shit on every time they put on that uniform. And Chris Dorner was just trying to get that out there. He is tired of watching these cowboys run the streets and make everybody live in fear. He knows that the motto created in 1955, to serve and protect, meant nothing then, and it means nothing now. And it's not until we hold these guys to justice and that we hold them to the same standard that we instill within ourselves as good people that anything is going to change. And the reign of this LAPD cycle is never going to end. And I wish Chris Dorner the best of luck. And I hope he stays alive. I hope he stays at large. And his points that he has made in his full 6,000-letter manifesto will continue to ring true as the LAPD continues to make fools of themselves in their frantic attempt to find the man who was willing to take his life and use it as an example to out the truth. And in outing the truth, I bid you guys good night. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Ooh, it's been an exhausting week. I think we're still going to hash out what our topic is for next week, but I do want to give you a quick little recap about the Occupy Buzz Tour while I got you there. We are going to be going on the road once again. North Carolina is our next stop. We're going to try to head to Asheville, meet some good people, and continue our tour. So definitely watch our blog for that at wordpress.com. We're also on Facebook. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Love ya.